Hello friends, Jeff here from House of Heresy, and we're back again with another deck tech video where I take one of my commander decks off the shelf, break it down, and talk about it for a bit in the video. What makes it work, what the thoughts are behind it, the cards that go into it, all that good stuff. As always, I am by no means an expert on any of this stuff, so it's fun to get to kind of talk about it, and it definitely provokes some cool conversations in the comments with people offering suggestions and things like that. So it's definitely been a fun video series so far, and we're gonna keep doing it as long as I have decks to talk about. So today we're gonna talk about probably one of my newest ones, and normally I would probably let this one sit for a little bit, play through it some more, but we had so much fun in the games that we've played with it, because it is kind of a fun, quirky deck. Has yet to win, but it's a lot of fun to play and can be very interactive. And it was so much fun that actually one of my friends in our regular play group actually asked to borrow or to play it himself, and in the first couple of games that we played there. So it has not just been played by me. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the commander is Satsuki the Living Lore, and this is a deck that cares about sagas. So really, it's a quote-unquote saga tribal deck. So she costs Selesnya, and she's a 1/3 human druid. Her first ability is you can tap to put a lore counter on each saga you control, activate only as a sorcery. And then when she dies, you can choose up to one. You can return target saga or enchantment creature you control to its owner's hand, or you can return target saga card from your graveyard to your hand. So she, once you get her out and you get a bunch of sagas going, she can start plowing through them pretty quickly. And with the newer Kamigawa sagas that flip once they reach their third one, then or the third stage, then you can a lot of times you can end up with a pretty decent board state pretty fast. And she's super cheap, obviously, only 2 mana to cast her, so her dying and getting value out of that and then recasting isn't an oppressive cost for the deck. So let's get right into it, and then we'll kind of keep referring back to her as we're doing stuff. So first deck, these are all the sagas. I'm pretty sure, I haven't done like a comprehensive check, but I'm pretty sure that I have all but about 2 of the eligible sagas in this deck, and the 2 that I kept out, I can't remember the names. One is the one that destroys all lands, and then for the next 2 you bring 2 lands back. It's pretty impressive. I don't know. I just that's not a deck or not a card that I really want to put in the deck. Maybe if I was taking it up to the Commander League regularly and was actively trying to win games there, but even then, that's like really it just makes you an enemy. And it's just, I don't know. My personal take, I just didn't want to put it in here. I would say anybody that's playing this deck is certainly a legitimate card for being in here and can actually blow up all the lands and get four lands back out pretty quickly for the table. But at the end of the day, it's like, I don't know, it's just kind of a feels bad card, I think, for most of the pot, unless you're just really playing a pretty aggressive deck or a group of decks there. And then the other one, It's the Planeswalker saga from Dominaria United. I think it's like Urza Unites something. Or Karn, something with Karn. I can't remember the name of it, I apologize. But basically it's all about the Planeswalkers, and this deck has no Planeswalkers. So not putting it in just for the sake of doing it. So there are 21 sagas in here. And like I said, I'm pretty sure that that's all the sagas that I could legally put in here minus 2. So we'll see how that goes. So the first saga, this is probably one of the stronger ones. Elspeth conquers death out of Theros, and it's one of our most interactive ones. We have a couple that have a similar effect, but basically the first one is you're exiling target permanent an opponent controls with CMC 3 or greater. So that's very versatile. Exile is always better than destroy, almost always better than destroy. And since it targets permanents, not just creatures, it gives you a lot of ways to deal with things. And then the second one, non-creature spells your opponent's cast cost 2 more to cast during your next turn. or until your next turn. So again, very helpful for you. Can really kind of slow the game down a little bit. And then the last one, returning creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Like I said, we don't have any planeswalkers, so it would be creatures, and we don't have a ton of creatures. So that is very situational based on your graveyard state. Maybe you do, maybe you don't have something to take advantage of that. But really, the main one is the first two. Really strong one. Then we get the Fall of Lord Kondo. This is one of the Kamigawa ones. So similar effect on the first one, except it targets creatures specifically that are mana value 4 or greater. Again, exiling them. Then 2, each player gains control of all permanents they own. Kind of situational, although the couple games that I've played recently with this deck, it did actually matter because people were stealing each other's stuff and passing them around. We had Seedborn Muse going and passed around between a bunch of different players, and yeah, put an end to that, at least for that turn. And then you exile it and return it transformed. So all of the Kamigawa ones, they have the first 2 that do something, and then the third one is you're going to exile and return it to the battlefield, and generally it's coming back as a creature, and I think all but like one of them. So this will come back as Fragment of Kondo. It's got Defender, and when it dies, you draw a card. So it's not as powerful as some of the old sagas where the third effect is like kind of the big one. However, it does help you create a board state for free, essentially, and a lot of them, they're generally enchantment creatures. I think, actually, I don't recall what the subtype was for this. Yeah, enchantment creature. And we do have some synergies for enchantment creatures, or just a number of enchantments on the board. So it's pretty helpful. And then when it dies, it goes back to the graveyard and would become the enchantment again, which is what we want. We'd rather see that. So then we got Fall of the Imposter. So the first 2 are just putting 1/1 counters on creatures. And then the third one is you're going to exile a creature with the greatest power among creatures target opponent controls for 3 mana. You got Michiko's Reign of Truth. This is another Kamigawa one. So first 2, you're adding 1/1 counters until end of turn for each artifact or enchantment you control. Sorry, it gets 1/1, does not get counters. Gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So we tend to have a fair number of enchantments out at any given point, and then we have a few artifacts, the usual suspects there for most decks. And then you exile it, and it comes back as Portrait of Michiko. So again, another enchantment creature. It's +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment you control. So this one's like really can become very strong. This will potentially put a very large body on the battlefield for you. So even though the first 2 are can be a little situational, getting that as a permanent on the battlefield is actually pretty helpful. We got Tales of Master Seshiro. So again, putting 1/1 counters on target creature or vehicle, which this deck has no vehicles, and they gain vigilance till end of turn. And then you can exile to return to the battlefield transferred under your control. So it becomes the Living Legacy, another enchantment creature it's a 5/5 with vigilance and haste. So another big body, which is pretty nice. All right, so next up, we have Befriending the Moths, another Kamigawa one. So again, target creature gets +1/+1 and gains flying until end of turn. And then after you reach the third one, you exile it, and it becomes Imperial Moth, also enchantment creature, and a 2/4 with flying. All right, and then we got Era of Enlightenment, again another Kamigawa one. They we taken full advantage of those because they do form the bulk of the eligible sagas for this deck, based on the colors. So first one's Scry 2, second one's Gain 2 life, and then you're gonna exile it and return it as another enchantment creature, a 2/2 with first strike. So again, none of these are like super high impactful. And the one thing to understand about this deck is that, at least the way I constructed it, is it doesn't have like a clear-cut win con in the sense that or some combo or something like that. Really, you're just you're creating a board state and then looking for opportunities and taking advantage of casting and recasting and going through the sagas and your enchantments as often as you need to. which as you'll see as we go through this, the picture should develop a little bit more clearly. But this is not a high power deck by any stretch, but like I said, it's a lot of fun to play. So hopefully you at least give it a chance as I'm describing it here before you write it off entirely. So then we got Azusa's Many Journeys. So this one a little bit different than the last few we've had. So you can play an additional land this turn, which is nice. We do have some ramp in this deck, but more lands the better. And then you gain 3 life, and then you get to, once again, exile, and it comes back as Likeness of the Seeker. And then whenever Likeness of the Seeker becomes blocked, untap up to 3 lands you control. So it's a 3/3 enchantment creature. So nice little way to extend your turn there a little bit if you can start swinging, and especially if you can pump her up with some of the other sagas that are giving +1/+1 or something like that. All right, back to a non-Kamigawa one. We got the Mending of Dominaria. So first 2 are putting the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. Then you can return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. A little bit situational because again we don't have a ton of creatures in here. But the third one's pretty nice. So then you return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then shuffle your graveyard into your library. So first 2 we're just kind of dealing with it. Maybe we get some creatures, maybe we don't. But then the third one is a nice way to extend your game a little bit. Because I have died to getting milled out, or really milling my... Well, I had some help, but I also drew probably the larger percentage of my deck personally. So getting to shuffle all those cards back into your graveyard is very helpful, because as you'll see as we get into this, this deck has no problem drawing a bunch of cards. And we got Binding of the Titans. So this one, again, another non-Kamigawa one out of Theros. Each player puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. Then you exile up to 2 target cards from graveyards. For each creature exiled, this way you gain a life. So you can kind of do a little bit of graveyard hate to the other decks on the table. And then you return creature or land card from your graveyard to your hand. So a nice little bit of recursion there. And we do we want the recursion because we want to keep the cycle going of casting, cycling through, and then returning completed sagas from their graveyard to the battlefield or to our hand. All right, we got the Weatherseed Treaty. This is out of Dominaria United. Search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Then you create a 1/1 green Saproling creature token. So we do have a few of these in the next few that are going to be generating some token creatures. It's not going to win you the game, but putting bodies on the battlefield in addition to all these sagas and enchantments and stuff is very helpful, because we have, as you've seen, we have sagas that want to buff creatures, and then it also protects us a little bit and helps us swing out and eventually get to clear the path to a more traditional victory where we win through combat damage. And then the third one is Domain. So you'll never get more than +2/+2 for this, but target creature you control gets +X/+X, and Domain is based on the number of basic lands or basic land types that you have. We only have plains and forests, so we're never going to get higher than +2/+2. And gains trample until end of turn, where X is the number of basic lands or land types among lands you control. Okay, there, so that explains it. So we're never going to get higher than +2/+2. But we do have some creatures, as you've seen, that are already starting kind of strong. So if you give that 5/5 +2/+2 in trample, or you give the one that's based on power and toughness is based on the amount of artifacts and enchantments you have, you could really swing in for some decent damage. We got Seiju Reaches Skyward, back to a Kamigawa one. So this one lets you search for up to 2 basic forest cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, and then shuffle, which is nice. We like to get the lands out of our deck onto the battlefield. It's obviously it's nice to ramp, but it also helps us with some of our other abilities where we're more interested in seeing those enchantments coming out instead of lands. Then you can put up to 1 target land card from your graveyard on top of your library if you had to mill one or something got blown up or something. And then you exile it, and it becomes an enchantment creature plant with 0/0, and it gets +1/+1 for each land you control. So again, we want those lands on the battlefield for a variety of reasons, and this is another one because this gets really big really fast. I did not ever In these games so far, I have not had an issue with getting a very large land base on the battlefield. A lot of that comes down to the amount of card draw that we are able to generate, but just in general, like we have some ramp spells in here and stuff, and ramp is always good. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not downplaying the importance of ramp just in general, but in this deck in particular, it just really helps us quite a bit. Not even necessarily for just the amount of mana we generate, just because of the different interactions that we have. All right, next we got the Restoration of Iganjo. This is another Kamigawa one. So first one lets you search for a basic plains card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. Then you can discard a card, and when you do, return target permanent card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Again, we like recursion. We find stuff in our graveyard a fair bit, either through the Sagas or if we don't have a no max hand size artifact or land on the battlefield, then we're going to end up discarding a fair bit with the amount of card draw that we generate. And then the third one triggers and becomes a 3/4 Fox Monk enchantment creature with vigilance, and whenever Architect of Restoration attacks or blocks, create a 1/1 colorless spirit creature. So we like, again, we like creating those tokens. We don't have a ton of like direct token synergy, but just having the bodies on the board is really nice. Then we got the World Spell. This one, first two let you look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may reveal a non-saga permanent card from among them, put them onto your hand, or put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This one, it can feel a little bit counterintuitive because obviously we want the Sagas, but we have a lot of cards that really synergize well. So that might be more important depending on the current state of the board. And then also this is another one of the Dominaria United ones. I don't think I said it for the other one, but they have the read ahead mechanic for their Sagas, which means you choose which chapter you start on. So you could start on one like normal. You could pick 2 if you wanted to, or you could pick 3 and go straight, just do 3 and then it goes away. And then the third one is you put 2 non-saga permanent cards from your hand onto the battlefield. So maybe you want to just do that. Just pay the 7, put this down, start it on 3, and then put two permanents on the battlefield. It's probably, I think it is our most expensive Saga by far. Generally speaking, Sagas are fairly cheap mana cost wise or mana value wise. This one is not, but we tend to generate a lot of land on the battlefield, so it's usually not a huge deal. And we got the Dragon Kame Reborn, back to Kamigawa. So first 2 are you're gaining 2 life, and then you look at the top 3 cards of your library. Exile one of them face down with a hatching counter on it, put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. This one is very situational, and I've definitely had it not pay off. So the reason why I say that is because when it flips, it becomes a 0/1 egg enchantment creature. And whenever Dragon Kame's egg or a dragon you control dies, and I don't believe we have any other dragons in this deck, you may cast a creature spell from among the cards you own in exile with hatching counters on them without paying its mana cost. So regardless of what you pick, if you don't pick a creature, you're not going to get any value out of that back. You're just exiling cards. So it's realistically the only reason why it's in here is because I want to have the most Sagas that I can, and there's an off chance that it will become useful, but I would not be expecting that to consistently do great things for you. Then we got the Teaching of the Kirin, another Kamigawa one. So you mill 3 cards, create a 1/1 colorless spirit token, then you put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control, and then you get to exile it and create Kiernan Touched Orachi. So it's a 1/1 enchantment creature, Snake Monk. Whenever it attacks, you choose 1. You exile the target creature card from a graveyard, and when you do, create a 1/1 spiritless or 1/1 colorless spirit creature token. Or you can exile target non-creature card from a graveyard, and when you do, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. If you can keep this thing alive, it's actually really strong. But that's kind of that would be the question mark, because it starts as a 1/1, and then you gotta go up from there. So you can definitely buff it, but it may or may not be super useful. But for 2 mana, it's a really good Saga for its cost. Okay, then we got Yugen Defends the Temple. So first one is creating a 1/1 green human monk creature token with tap, add a green. We like ramp. We like creature bodies on the battlefield, so that's a good one. 2, put a 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. So again, we like to buff our creatures, especially when we're generating these tokens. And then we can flip it, or then we do flip it for a 2/2. I guess we do have another dragon. So it's a 2/2 dragon spirit enchantment creature with flying. And whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay X. When you do, put X 1/1 counters on that creature. As long as you control 5 or more modified creatures, Remnant of Rising Star gets +5/+5 and has trample. So modified, really the only modified creatures we're going to have in this deck are going to be ones that have 1/1 counters on them, because we don't have any equipment, and we don't have any auras. So that's really the only that's the only trigger. But we do, as you've seen and as you'll continue to see, we do have a decent number of cards that do put counters out. So I think you have a at least an average chance probably of hitting that at some point, of getting that meeting that threshold of 5 modified creatures. All right, then we got the first Iroan games. So first you're creating a 1/1 white human soldier creature token, then you're putting 3 1/1 counters on target creature you control. Then if you control a creature with 4 or greater, you draw 2 cards, and finally you create a gold token, which is just kind of like an off-brand treasure token. Does this, I think, pretty much the same exact thing. It's just not a treasure token. Okay, then we got Love Song of Night and Day. This is from Dominaria United, so again has the skip ahead or the read ahead feature. So you can pick where you start with this. So first one, you and target opponent each draw 2 cards. Great political tool. I definitely use this to good effect to buy me a couple turns in the games that I've played with this. Then you create a 1/1 white bird token or bird creature token with flying. This one's especially good because we don't have a ton of flyers or ways to interact directly with flyers outside of just like the usual board wipes or direct damage. So this so getting a flying creature token is pretty nice. Actually, I take that back. We do have some ways to generate some flyers, which we'll get to. Now that I think about it, that's actually probably not a true statement. I think we do okay in that regard. But still, getting an extra one is nice, especially when we can buff it up. And then the third one, you put a 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. So you can kind of pick if you really want a flyer right off the bat. That's a good way to go, but card draw is always pretty nice. And then we got History of Benalia. This one's out of OG Dominaria. So you got the first 2 are creating a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. So you'll end up with 2 of those. And then knights you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. Those 2 tokens are, I believe, without actually like looking at every single card in this deck, are probably the only ones that are going to get any value out of that. But 3 mana for 4 power essentially on the board, and then buffing it up to 8 power essentially by the 3rd turn is not terrible. And again, it's a saga that we can use, and we want to have as many sagas as we can in this deck, so we get the most value out of our commander and the other synergies. And then finally, the last of the sagas, we got the Battle for Bredegard out of Kaldheim. And first one lets you create a 1/1 white human warrior creature token. Second one lets you create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token. And then the third one lets you choose any number of artifact tokens and or creature tokens you control with different names. For each of them, create a token that's a copy of it. We do generate a lot of tokens. Again, it's not like the main focus of the deck, but it's probably how we would end up winning most games. I don't have a lot of like token payoff or token synergies necessarily, or like creature synergies in this deck. But cards like this can definitely help create a much wider board state that allows us to do more damage and maybe eventually bring the game to a close. So that's it for the sagas. That's definitely probably the most important pile in the deck, because that's where everything revolves around that. Whether those sagas really are doing great things or not for us, doesn't matter. We want them. We want to be able to trigger them quickly, get them in our graveyard, get them back into our hand, get them back onto the battlefield, what have you, and just keep the cycle going, keep the value generation going as we work towards whatever path we need to take to get to victory. So the next stack is going to be more generic payoffs for enchantments in general. I don't recall. There might be 1 or 2 cards in here that are specific to sagas, but I don't think so. So the first few are primarily going to be how we create that card draw engine. And we can potentially generate up to, I believe, 4 cards drawn per enchantment that we play. And that gets really stupid really quickly. We end up with huge hand sizes. The very first game I played with this deck, by the time I died through milling, or through not having a card to draw from my deck, I had a larger hand size than both my graveyard and my deck. So you can definitely do it pretty quickly. First one, Sithis. Most people are familiar with this card because this is probably one of the most common and iconic enchantment commanders that you see out there. Really strong. You could just as easily be playing her, but we're focusing on the Sagas, so that's why Satsuki is our commander. And she's, again, just Selesnya for 1/2, and she is an enchantment creature, so that helps. She has more synergy than Satsuki does in that regard. And whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you gain a life and draw a card, which is great. We like to gain life. We like to draw cards. Very strong. We always want to play her as soon as we get her on in our hand. Eidolon of Blossoms, another really strong one. So for 4 mana this time, for an enchantment creature, again, playing into those synergies, you get a 2/2 with Constellation, and whenever Eidolon or another enchantment enters the battlefield under you control, you draw a card. So you get the card draw with this one as well, which is nice because this even if this is the first card draw payoff card that you're playing, you're still getting to draw a card with it, and that's not true for any of the other ones. Then we got Mesa Enchantress, another classic enchantment deck staple. So for 3 mana, you get whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you may draw a card and she's a 0/2 human. Enchantress's Presence is actually an enchantment for 3 mana, and whenever you cast an enchantment spell, draw a card. So as you can see with those 4, if we get any combination of those 4 out, we are drawing cards, which is great. We want that. This deck really wants to be able to have a wide plethora of choices each turn in each phase for what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. Here's another payoff, and this is one of the cards that when I corrected myself saying we didn't have a ton of great ways to interact with flyers. This card says no, that's not true. So whenever you cast an enchantment spell, create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying, and you can create a ton of angels. I think at one point I had at least 8 before they started dying. And it's not hard, especially with how quickly we can generate a decent sized land base and how cheap most of our enchantments are, to get a bunch of them out in like a turn. Like you can go from 0 to 4 easily in a turn in the mid game. Then we got Historian's Boon. So this is a newer one. This is out of the Dominaria United Commander. So for 4 mana, you get another enchantment. Whenever Historian's Boon or another non-token enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. Great, we love creating tokens. However, whenever the final chapter ability of a saga you control triggers, create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying and vigilance. So these ones are actually better because they get vigilance on top of the flying. And we will be triggering lots of end step final chapters of our sagas. So you again can create a bunch of soldiers by casting them and a bunch of angels by completing them. We got Hallowed Haunting. This one's out of Crimson Vow. So for 4 mana, get another enchantment. As long as you control 7 or more enchantments, creatures you control have flying and vigilance. Great. We'll probably have a bunch of tokens out, so that's awesome. And then whenever you cast an enchantment spell, create a white cleric creature token with this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of spirits you control. This one takes a little time for them to start getting big, but if this sticks on the battlefield and you're casting enchantment spells with the frequency that you probably should be, then you can create a bunch of spirits that become larger and larger. So another really strong card. Starfield Mystic. So these next cards are going to make our enchantments even cheaper. So for 2 mana, you get a 2/2 human cleric, and enchantment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So this also counts for our enchantment creatures and our enchantments, anything that's got the word enchantment on it. And whenever an enchantment you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you put a 1/1 counter on Starfield Mystic. So it's cool if our stuff gets destroyed, he gets bigger. If we complete our sagas, it gets bigger. The one slight downside to the way some of the mechanics work now is that the Kamigawa ones won't really trigger him because, at least not initially, because they're going to flip and turn into creatures. So you might not get an instant payoff, but you could definitely get a bunch of counters on Storefield Mystic. Then we got the Jukai Naturalist, another 2-cost Selesnya, for a 2/2 enchantment creature with a lifelink, and enchantment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, 1 generic less. So that's great. We like to make them cheaper. Starnheim Corsair is a 3-mana Pegasus with 2/2 and flying, and artifact and enchantment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So that's even better because that discounts our artifacts as well. And yep, as you can see, I was very wrong when I initially said we did not have a lot of ways to interact with flying, because we do. We do. So I apologize for that. All right, then we get just some kind of general good interactive cards here for our enchantments or sagas. So you got Story Weave, which is 3 mana for an instant, and you choose one. You can either put 2 1/1 counters on target creature you control, or you can put 2 lore counters on target saga you control. And the next time one or more enchantment creatures enters the battlefield under your control this turn, each enters with 2 additional 1/1 counters on it. So you play this one early, trigger a saga, especially since the Kamigawa ones will get exiled and then return to the battlefield as their creature type. That means that we have some pretty solid chances of actually getting that creature, the second part to hit. So not only do you go through the sagas, but then you also get to buff those creatures as they enter the battlefield. Then you got Kami of Transience for 2 mana, a 2/2 with Trample, which is really good for what this does. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, put a 1/1 counter on Kami of Transience. Awesome. This will get really big really fast. And then at the beginning of each end step, if an enchantment was put into your graveyard from the battlefield this turn, you may return Kami of Transience from your graveyard to your hand. So again, we like recursion. This is super helpful. It's not an enchantment creature, which would probably really make this a super strong card for this deck. Or I guess an even stronger card. But this can really become really big very fast and is just a good card. And for 2 mana, it's really easy to get it out on the battlefield. Then we got Weaver of Harmony, another 2 mana 2/2. This one is an enchantment creature and is an enchantment creature lord. So other enchantment creatures you control get +1/+1. And then you can pay green to tap and copy target activated or triggered ability you control from an enchantment source. You may choose new targets for the copy. So this guy's pretty cool because he lets you copy the trigger for the sagas as they move down the levels there. So really a very strong card for this deck as well. All right, then we get into our tutors and recursion essentially. So how do we get the cards that we want into our hand or on the battlefield from the library and or graveyard? So first up, Enlightened Tutor. Doesn't need any real introduction. It's an instant. You search your library for an artifact or enchantment card, reveal it, then shuffle and put that card on top. So great card to cast in your opponent's end step before it becomes your turn. Idyllic Tutor just lets you search for an enchantment card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Costs a little bit more, and it's at sorcery speed, but being able to just pull those cards directly into your hand is really nice and lets you potentially go find that Elspeth Conquers Death to exile a problematic card or something like that. It's just really a no-brainer to put into this deck. Got Moonbase Cleric for 3 mana. It's a 3/2 elf, human elf cleric with Divine Intervention. When Moonbase Cleric enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an enchantment card, reveal it, then shuffle and put that card on top. So it doesn't have haste, or flash. I'm sorry, it doesn't have flash, so you don't have an easy way like at face value an easy way to do this where you'll then be drawing it. But with that said, we have so much card draft for when we play enchantments that you could easily do this, go search, put it on top of your library, then play an enchantment card, draw your 1 to 4 cards or whatever, and then draw that card. So there's a lot of ways to do it. It's a really strong card, and it's only an uncommon, so pretty easy to get your hands on out of AFR. We got Search for Glory. This is a tutor that came out of Kaldheim that doesn't see as much play as the other tutors, definitely doesn't carry the value. But for our deck, it's actually pretty strong. So for a white and 2 generic, you get a Snow Sorcery, and you get to search your library for a Snow permanent card. Not really any of those in here. A legendary card, do have a couple of those, or a Saga card. Hey, there we go. and then you can reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. And you gain 1 life for each snow mana spent to cast this spell. We don't have any snow lands in here. I didn't really think about it when I was building the deck. That's kind of situational for this one card. I would say that if you have them available to you and you want to build a deck similar to this using this card, there's really no downside to just using the snow lands. But as you'll see with the basics, I wanted to use the cool Kamigawa basics. So I'm kind of hindering myself a little bit there. But if you want to take the more min-max approach, like absolutely have all your basics be snow. All right, then we got Brilliant Restoration. This one's out of Kamigawa. So for 7 mana, you return all artifact and enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. It's an expensive cost, but we generally are not as worried in this deck about how much mana we have on the battlefield. As with any deck, you could draw terribly. You could end up with your entire land base clumped up, deep into the deck and you just haven't drawn into it. But by and large, at least my experience with the deck as I've played the games, this is pretty attainable when it matters, when you actually have a decent depth of enchantments in your graveyard, and then this becomes very strong. Resurgent Belief does a similar effect, except it's got Suspend, so you got to wait a couple turns for it to happen, but you return all enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then this one's just enchantments, whereas Brilliant Restoration was also artifacts. Brought back, this one's great because we can expect our sagas we can predict when our sagas are going to enter the battlefield, enter the graveyard. So for 2 mana, it's an instant. You choose up to 2 target permanent cards in your graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. Return them to the battlefield tapped. So this is almost a guaranteed. Pay 2 mana, get 2 sagas back on the battlefield for free. Everything else entering the graveyard is a little bit harder to predict. Kind of relies on your opponents to have something to say about it, because we don't really have any sack outlets in this deck. But for the sagas, this is a wonderful card. Unnatural Restoration. Here's one of the new ones out of Phyrexia All Will Be One. And you return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, and then proliferate. So it's got recursion, which we like, and proliferate's pretty nice because we add an extra H counter, so you could potentially trigger all your sagas another time, which is, as you've seen with this deck, is pretty handy. Balagad Recovery out of Zendikar Rising. You can either play it to return target card from your graveyard to your hand, or you can flip it. It's one of the modal cards, and it can come into play tapped as a green source of mana. So it's pretty handy. Just the recursion itself is nice because it's any card. But if you're low on mana, it's also gives you a little bit of wiggle room there. Then we got Season of Renewal out of Kamigawa. So for 3 mana, you choose one or both. You can return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, or you can return target enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. So nice bit of recursion there. And then you got Narika Yamazaki the Poet. For 3 mana, you get a 3/2 with Vigilance, legendary human samurai. And whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, you may cast target enchantment card from your graveyard this turn. This one's very situational. We don't have a ton of samurais or warriors. I feel like we do generate some warrior tokens. I don't think we have any other samurai though. I'd have to go back and look. It's possible one of the Kamigawa sagas might flip into an enchantment samurai or something like that. I don't know. I don't recall offhand. But this would probably be a pretty easy card to drop if you're looking to change up the deck a little bit. But it's got enough value, and it's it's a 3/2 with Vigilance, so it'll give you some degree of protection. If you are able to do this, then it's again another nice way to utilize your graveyard as a second card source there. So, I mean, I obviously it's in my deck. I think it's good enough to at least put it in there. I probably could swap it out easily for something else, but it's in there for now. I would say that's a pretty easy low-hanging fruit if you wanted to swap stuff around. All right, then we get some just general good cards that we want to have in here that protect us and or our enchantments. So Teferi's Protection. Obviously, this is a strong card for any deck that has white because it protects you and your permanents. Really no reason not to put it in there except that it's expensive. So If you have a copy of it when you're building this deck, I would definitely say put it in there, but if not, then it's, not the end of the world. Cosmic Intervention. This one actually was out of the Call Time Commander, the Blink deck. So this one, it's got the foretell mechanics. You can either pay the 4 or you can pay 2 generic and then foretell it, and then in a later turn you can pay the 2 mana to cast it. So it's an instant, and if a permanent you control would be put into a graveyard from battlefield this turn, exile it instead, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So this is a nice way to protect your board a little bit. You can do this, and then when they ETB, you'll get value from all those sagas. So really a pretty solid card. Definitely worth putting in there, and it's not a stupid expensive one. Privileged Position, it's an enchantment, and it protects your other enchantments and permanents in general. So really, is it super necessary for the deck? Probably not. I mean, the likelihood of people just targeting your sagas is kind of low because none of them in and of themselves are like stupid powerful, but still, it's a good card. It just got a reprint in Double Masters 2022, so it's fairly cheap, so I think it's worth putting in there. And then Ghostly Prison, another one of those classic protection cards there. So you pay 3 mana, and creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 generic for each creature they control that's attacking. You're generally going to have a board state with this deck, just with the amount of tokens that we can generate from the different sources, the sagas and the other enchantments. And we do have a decent number of creatures sprinkled in. But still, it's nice to kind of force your opponent to make hard choices, and then if they are going wide, then really making it painful or expensive for them to swing out at you. Okay, then we have our different types of removal. So we got our single target removal first. Got Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile, because white decks don't leave home without them. Exile effects are great. We got Generous Gift. This one is not an exile effect, but it does let you target permanents instead of just creatures. And then they get a 3/3 green elfin creature token, so it's pretty versatile. Again, probably worth putting in most of the time. Farewell is, as everybody knows that has watched my decks, that could have Farewell in it and does have Farewell. I speak very highly of this card. This is one of my favorite cards, probably my favorite single card to get printed in 2022, and I think it's probably one of the strongest cards from last year. So highly recommend it. It is no real downside to it. I know this one's in Japanese, but it's actually the only copy I have of the awesome showcase artwork there. So basically, when you cast it, it's a 6 mana sorcery, and then you choose one or more, and it's exile all artifacts, exile all enchantments, exile all creatures, exile all graveyards. You can choose one or more of those. You can really be targeted in what you do, and it's exile, which is awesome. So much better in almost every situation, outside of a very few niche situations that may not be true. It's so much better than just actual destruction. It just gets around so many mechanics that keep stuff on the board. So very strong. Highly recommend putting it in there. It is also one of the most expensive ones out of Kamigawa now, so a little bit harder to get a hold of, but if you can, then do it. And then Austere Command, another kind of pick your own adventure board wipe. So for 6 mana, you choose 2. You can destroy all artifacts, all enchantments, creatures 3 or less, or creatures 4 or more mana value. So it's just another nice way to kind of help you take care of what you need to take care of. All right, and then the last stack before we get into the lands. This one's all about our ability to generate mana, essentially. So more or less ramp. So we got our traditional ramp spells. We're going and finding lands. So you got Cultivate, can search for 2 basic land cards, reveal them, put one on the battlefield tapped, the other in your library. Kodama's Reach does essentially the same thing. Then we got 3 Visits, which you're searching your library for a forest card and putting it onto the battlefield, untapped, and then shuffle your library. So again, very nice. Scholar of New Horizons. So this one does a couple different things. It's a 2 mana 1/1, and it enters the battlefield with a 1/1 counter on it. So that again helps with our modified the one saga that cared about the modified creatures. And then you can also tap and remove a counter from a permanent you control to search your library for a plains card and reveal it. If an opponent controls more lands than you, you may put that card onto the battlefield tapped. If you don't put it on the battlefield, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So this lets us thin our deck, lets us continue to make our land drops on curve. But more importantly, this lets us backtrack on our sagas. So to lets us get more value out of the sagas, because we put age counters on the lore counters on the sagas to denote which level they're at. So this is a very strong card. Lets us kind of bounce around with the different effects as we're messing with the sagas there. So pretty strong, only 2 mana. No reason not to put it in there if you can get a copy of it. And that was out of the Brothers War Commander set. And you have Commune with Spirits, which lets you look at the top 4 cards of your library, and you can reveal an enchantment or land card from among them, put it in your hand, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this one lets you kind of filter as well. If you need land, you can grab a land. If not, then we have a ton of enchantments in here, so you will almost always get some value out of that card. Then you got Shigeki Jukai Visionary. For 2 mana, you get a 1/3 enchantment creature, Snake Druid. So again, more enchantment synergies there. You can pay 1 and a green to tap and return them to its owner's hand and reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You can put a land card from among them onto the battlefield tapped and the rest onto your graveyard, so it gets some ramp. Or you can channel, so you pay XX and then 2 green to discard and return X target non-legendary cards from your graveyard to your hand. So it gives you recursion. So you can ramp and or recur with this card, which is actually it wouldn't be an and, because that's discarding from your hand. So ramp or recur. And it's an enchantment, so you could just as easily find it coming back onto the battlefield. Smothering Tithe, again, very strong card, a staple of most white decks. Lets you generate treasures, which is its own form of ramp, so I'm not going to say much about that. This card, I totally had never seen this card before until I started researching this deck. But this is a great card for this deck. Really, really strong, and I could see where it could play well in some other ones. So for 3 mana, you get a mana rock. Add 1 mana of any color. I know that's not ideal. Most people like the 2 mana rock or two cost mana rocks now. But the second ability, you pay a generic to untap target legendary creature you control, is really strong in this deck because that lets you use Satsuki's tap ability twice, which is putting a lore counter on each saga you control. So you could go really in just a single turn or phase, really. You could essentially end all your sagas and then either flip the Kamigawa ones into creatures or get a bunch into your graveyard and then recur them in the best case scenario, and then get even more value out of it. So theoretically, you could go through the entire like all of the sagas on your board. You could go through their entire 3 or so levels in a single turn, going 2, 3, and then back to 1 again. So very strong for this deck. Quite a good card, and it's only an uncommon. And then we got our typical mana rocks. So Soul Ring, Decanter of Endless Water. Again, it's a 3 mana rock that you tap for any color, but you have no max hand size, so that makes it really good. I actually ran out of Thought Vessels, so I don't have that in this deck, but that's one that will get added at some point once I pick up a couple more copies, because you really want no maximum hand size in this deck. That is very important because we draw a ton of cards. You got Commander Sphere, which lets you tap for any color in your commander's identity or sack it to draw a card, and then Arcane Signet. So the 2 mana rock that lets you add any color from your commander's identity. Okay, so that's it for the ramp. Now we're going to look at the lands. And I know in some of the past videos I've kind of broken the lands out amongst the other piles, but I just decided to keep them all together here. So first up, Hall of Hiliad's Generosity. This one's it's an expensive card. Came out in Modern Horizons 1, but it's really good for this deck. Especially since it's within our color pie there. So you tap it for generic, or you can pay 1 into white to tap it and put target enchantment card from your graveyard on top of your library. We're going to have enchantments going into the graveyard. That's just the way sagas work for the most part. So it's just a really good card. Helps us continue to keep the generation alive. Then we got, of course, if you have access to them, throw in the channel lands in there is never bad. Boseiju is obviously the best one, definitely the most expensive one, so I can understand if you don't have a copy. I wouldn't say go buy one just for this deck, because really it's not like super synergistic, it's just a good card. But you can channel it, for those that don't. aren't familiar with the card, you can pay green and a generic, and in most cases this will just cost green, since you discount the generic based on the number of legendary creatures you control on the battlefield, and since our commander's so cheap, most of the time we're probably going to have her out there. So this would just cost a green. And then you discard it to destroy target artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land an opponent controls, and then they can search their library for a land card with a basic land type, put it on the battlefield, and then shuffle. Very strong card. Very, very strong card. It instantly became the most valuable card in the set outside of like the Neon Ink cards when Kamigawa came out. And yeah, there's really not a lot of downside to it. I mean, obviously you're giving your opponent a land with a basic land type, so it could be like a Triome or a basic land or whatever. But the channel abilities are just so strong because you're not casting them, so you have to have, in order to interact with it, you have to be able to interact with an activated ability essentially. So really good card. Then of course we got Iganjo, Seed of the Empire, the other channel land from Kamigawa that we were eligible to put in here. This one costs a little bit more, and it deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. And again, can be discounted based on the number of legendary creatures you have on the battlefield. Roadside Reliquary, this is another one out of Kamigawa. You can tap it for generic, or you can pay 2 to sack it and draw a card if you control an artifact, and draw a card if you control an enchantment. And we don't have a ton of artifacts, but 2 mana to draw 1 is pretty good. 2 mana to draw 2 is amazing, so the upside to it's really strong. Reliquary Tower, probably one of the most important lands we actually had put in this deck because of the amount of card draw we have, so definitely want to have a copy of that in there. Bountiful Promenade, great for commander, and these colors almost always going to come into play untapped unless you're casting it at the end of the game when it's just you and an opponent. Command Tower, again, like just a staple for commander decks. Overgrown Farmland, this is one of the slow lands in this case out of Midnight Hunt. Again, very strong. You're probably going to have 2 or more lands to let it come into play untapped. Temple Garden, shock lands are great. This is one that you could go searching for. We don't have any. I didn't put any fetch lands in here, but we do have ways to go find forests. So like 3 visits, we could go find this card, which is helpful. Selesnya's Sanctuary. I mean, the bounce lands, you either like them or you don't. I think I have yet to feel like I'm like under pressure from my mana base, so I'm not super worried about playing this and then getting the extra value out of having a land that generates 2. And then of course Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, because it's helpful to have dual lands in here, and this deck in particular has more white than green, so we have more plains than forests. So all those, we essentially, when this is out, we would have 12 plains and 22 forests, so pretty strong. And then we get into the basics. So like I said, I have 12 plains in here, and then 10 forests. So this deck, actually, I went a little bit, not necessarily higher, but more in line with what my ideal mana base would be. I know a lot of my decks I tend to go lower, tend to be a little bit more cavalier with my with how many lands I put in here, or how few lands I put in my decks. But in this case, I decided to be a little bit, just put them in there because we do have cards that like to go find lands and stuff. And excuse me, if we can put them on the deck, or put them out into the battlefield, then so much the better. Okay, so that's it. That is Satsuki, the Living Lore. Again, a very fun deck. I would not rate this super high power. We do have looks to be some interesting cards coming out. For those that have been keeping up with the spoiler season, they did preview the Tom Bombadil card from the new Lord of the Rings set that's coming out, and that is a 5-color Saga tribal legendary creature, so essentially commander. And I will say that the biggest limiting factor for this deck is that we're limited to those 2 colors, because there's a lot of really good Sagas that aren't in green, white, or both those colors. So getting access to all colors of Sagas is, I could definitely understand why you would rather go with that deck, because that will be a much stronger deck, probably able to be a little bit more competitive. But even with that said, like this deck is a ton of fun. It can play a little bit slower when you're triggering all these sagas. It reminds me of my Super Friends deck to a degree, because you're kind of the Super Friends plays a little bit slower because you're having to choose which loyalty abilities you want to do. This one, just because we generally, I found I've had between 3 to 7 sagas out at any given time as the deck starts moving into the mid game. You kind of have to choose which order you want to go in to some degree, or how you want to interact with the commander in terms of like at what point in those sagas triggering, or in the turn, do you want to start adding extra lore counters to them. But all in all, it's a fun interactive deck. It feels like you're doing stuff. Like every turn, you almost are never just sitting there, which is, to me, like that's fun. And that's part of why my friend wanted to try the deck as soon as he saw it played, because it looked like it was, even though it didn't win and it wasn't necessarily like a powerhouse, it just looked like a fun deck to play. And everyone else thought it was pretty entertaining to play against as well. So I would say this deck I would probably rate this a 7.5, maybe an 8. I guess, okay, we'll say an 8, because I do have some pretty strong, generically strong cards in here, like Smothering Tithe, Teferi's Protection, stuff like that, Boseiju. But if you were going to build this deck more on like a budget style, and generally speaking, like if you don't get all the fancy treatments, this deck is actually very inexpensive. So with that said, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate everybody that's taking the time to watch these videos. I know that some of them are more popular than others, but get lots of great feedback. So if you liked it, please give us a like. Please subscribe if you'd like to see more that's coming. We just hit 250 subscribers, so thank everybody so much for that. It's really cool to see the channel kind of continue to grow since we started back end of June into July. And we'll continue going. We do 3 videos on average a week, minimum of 3. So we have two days of pack cracking or box breaking on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then Saturdays are the Commander videos where we do the deck tech, to break it all down, talk about it. And yeah, throw some comments down there. I'd love to. I really enjoy the conversations that we have in these videos in particular, because a lot of people have tons of different experience in terms of like what they've played against, what they played with, and things like that. So I started playing Magic in the mid-90s in the Ice Age block, and I have had many years of breaks in between. So there's way more Magic cards that I am unaware even exist than I am knowledgeable about. So probably missed some staples that would be good in this, even with tools like EDHREC and Scryfall, where you can like search for stuff and kind of see what other people are doing. It's still too easy to miss stuff. So and then as always, I hope everyone enjoyed it, and until next time.